Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that literally has life or death stakes attached to it. The incredible, completely hidden highway of human liver function. Now, when this system is working, it silently protects you. It filters out hazards, and it completely shields you from fatal drug toxicity. But when it fails, well, the consequences are immediate and severe. We're going to explore exactly how this complex internal network operates, how modern medicine tracks it, and how some really cutting-edge technology is entirely changing the way we diagnose its failures. To really grasp liver health, you kind of have to picture it as this massive, bustling traffic system. Think about it. The liver receives about 1.5 liters of blood every single minute. The vast majority of this, we're talking about 75%, is delivered by the portal vein, which is carrying nutrients and newly absorbed drugs right straight from your digestive tract. The other 25%, that comes from the hepatic artery. It is a high-volume, highly efficient highway. But that begs the question, what happens when the body's primary filtration system gets backed up? Just like a major interstate, when the flow slows down to a crawl, dangerous hazards, in this case, toxic pharmaceutical buildups and intense internal pressures, begin to accumulate incredibly fast in the bloodstream. And that brings us to the root cause of this massive internal traffic jam. In medical terms, it's called portal hypertension. As chronic liver disease progresses, the liver tissue gets inflamed and scarred. You've probably heard of fibrosis or cirrhosis. Well, this structural distortion acts exactly like lanes closing down on our highway. The pathway's narrow, intrahepatic vascular resistance increases, and this dangerous amount of pressure builds up right behind the blockage. It creates a massive hemodynamic shift, basically a fundamental change in how blood and the drugs traveling within it move through your body. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the liver's traffic jam. 2, the HVPG gold standard. 3, the non-invasive frontier. And finally, 4, bridging the clinical gap. Section 1, the liver's traffic jam. Okay, let's dive right into this and unpack the really fascinating mechanics behind how the liver actually handles its pharmaceutical cargo. You know, whenever you take a medication, getting it out of your blood depends largely on something called the hepatic extraction ratio. And we can basically divide drugs into 2 main categories here. On one side, you've got low extraction drugs. This is stuff like the blood thinner warfarin or the sedative diazepam. These rely mostly on liver enzyme activity to be cleared out. But on the other side, we have high extraction drugs. Think of the heavy hitters, right? Lidocaine, morphine, propranolol. These are entirely flow limited. What that means is the liver removes them almost instantly, but its ability to do so depends completely on the volume of blood rushing through the organ. Now, to understand the real-world danger here, just consider this number, 50%. Severe conditions outside the liver, like congestive heart failure, can reduce cardiac output so drastically that hepatic blood flow drops by up to 50%. So, if you give a standard dose of a high extraction drug, like morphine, to a patient with this kind of reduced flow, the liver simply doesn't have the blood volume it needs to sweep the drug away. The medication just accumulates in the system, the amount of active drug in your bloodstream spikes, and your risk of severe toxicity skyrockets. The speed of the traffic directly dictates the safety of the drug. Section 2, the HVPG gold standard. So if blood flow and internal pressure are absolutely crucial, how do doctors actually measure a traffic jam hidden deep inside your abdomen? Enter HVPG. This is the validated international gold standard for assessing the severity of portal hypertension. And the stakes here, they are incredibly high. Clinicians use HVPG to differentiate cirrhotic from non-cirrhotic liver issues and to guide life-saving medication therapies. But the absolute most critical marker here is the 12 millimeters of mercury threshold. If the pressure gradient inside the liver crosses 12 mmHg, the patient is at a massive risk of variceal bleeding. To put that in plain English, internal veins in the esophagus or stomach could literally burst open under the pressure. But actually getting this precise measurement, well, it is highly invasive and demands some serious technical skill. To get a reading, a specialized radiologist has to access the patient's internal jugular vein up in the neck using ultrasound guidance. Then, they snake a catheter all the way down into the hepatic vein of the liver. Once it's in there, they inflate a tiny balloon to temporarily block the vein and measure what's called the wedged pressure. Then, they deflate it to measure the free pressure. The difference between those 2 numbers is your HVPG. And just to ensure accuracy, they actually have to repeat this entire inflation and deflation process 3 times in a row. And this right here brilliantly illustrates the sheer level of discipline required to do this procedure properly.
I know it looks kind of like an impossibly complex IKEA manual, but it's actually a strict 12-step standardized protocol that was developed by a multidisciplinary team over at the Singapore General Hospital. Before this protocol existed, readings were all over the map because different operators were using different methods. Some used the wrong pressure scales, or they just didn't bother taking those triplicate readings, which resulted in crazy things like erroneous negative pressure values. This 12-step protocol ensures absolute reproducibility. It dictates everything, from how the patient is positioned down to the exact number of seconds allowed for the pressure readings to stabilize. And let me tell you, the results of actually enforcing that discipline were staggering. Before this protocol was introduced, a pretty dismal 5.6% of HVPG measurements met all the strict quality criteria, meaning they were actually done in triplicate with less than 2 millimeters of variance. But after standardizing, the proportion of quality, clinically actionable readings leaped to 70.1%. It was just a massive leap in clinical reliability. So the crucial point here is how this reliable data actually translates to saving lives. When doctors finally had accurate measurements, they could actively adjust medications to drop that internal pressure below the dangerous 12 millimeter Hg threshold, or at least drop it by 20% from the baseline. And for the patients who achieved this target response, their rate of variceal bleeding dropped to absolute zero, literally 0%. Accurate measurement directly translated into preventing fatal hemorrhages. Section 3, the non-invasive frontier. Because, let's face it, threading catheters through someone's neck and into their liver is heavily resource-dependent, it's expensive, and it is highly invasive. Medical science desperately sought a better way. So, what if we could see the traffic jam without ever making a physical cut? Well, recent studies evaluating portal vein Doppler ultrasound have shown that this completely non-invasive sound wave technology has a staggering 94.4% sensitivity for detecting chronic liver disease. That is an absolute game changer, especially for hospitals in resource-limited settings where those invasive biopsies or catheterizations just aren't feasible at all. Doppler ultrasound is amazing. It works by essentially acting like a radar gun for your blood flow. Going back to our traffic analogy, as liver fibrosis worsens, the main venous highway, the portal vein, slows down to an absolute crawl. But the liver still desperately needs oxygen, right? So to compensate, the smaller secondary road, the hepatic artery, starts pushing harder, building up massive resistance. Doppler actually lets us watch this physiological tug-of-war happen in real time. Radiologists using this tech look for very specific, mathematically precise diagnostic markers. For instance, they know serious trouble is brewing if the portal vein velocity drops below 16 centimeters per second. At the exact same time, they're looking for an elevated hepatic artery resistive index, or HARI, rising above 0.80. They also keep an eye out for the portal vein physically swelling past 13 millimeters in diameter and the loss of the normal, healthy 3-beat waveform in the hepatic veins. It's structural and hemodynamic distortion completely quantified just through sound waves. What we're looking at here elegantly maps out that physiological tug-of-war. Notice how, as the portal vein velocity drops along the bottom axis, the diagnostic probability of chronic liver disease just shoots upward. Simultaneously, that dashed line representing the hepatic artery resistive index climbs higher and higher as the artery struggles to compensate. That exact intersection right there, low venous flow and high arterial resistance, is the precise threshold where radiologists can confidently predict severe, biopsy-proven liver disease, all from entirely outside the body. No catheters required. Section 4. Bridging the clinical gap. All right, we've explored the biochemistry of drug clearance, the invasive mechanics of catheters, and the precision of sound waves. Now let's bring it all together. The central takeaway from our journey today is that hepatic hemodynamics isn't just some abstract medical concept. It is literally the engine of patient safety. Understanding the flow of blood through the liver dictates whether a simple prescription for morphine will actually relieve a patient's pain, or if it's going to accumulate into a lethal overdose just because of a congested heart. It dictates whether a clinician will prescribe a beta blocker to successfully drop internal pressure, effectively preventing a catastrophic internal hemorrhage. Blood flow is the ultimate arbiter of liver function. We have traveled from an era where the only way to truly understand the liver was to cut into it, or snake wires into its deepest veins, right up to a new frontier where we can read its health through the echoes of sound waves. So I want to leave you with this to ponder. As technology continues to sharpen, how might our evolving ability to seamlessly measure fluid dynamics not just map the human body, but entirely replace the invasive surgeries of the past? It's a fascinating future to look forward to for sure. Keep learning, keep questioning, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.